Good afternoon. Thank you for attending today. This is the first stakeholder meeting for Facility Hardship and Seismic Mitigation Program proposed regulation updates. I'm Brian LePask. I'm the Operations and Policy Manager and Program Services at OPSC. To my left is Jennifer Mastretti. She's the supervisor for the programs. And next to her, we have Slavana Kravchek, who is our program analyst. Before we get started, there's a few things I wanted to kind of set the tone here a little bit today. First of all, we're happy to see a few faces here. Not as many as we might have hoped, but there's a few people here. Thank you very much. The reason we're here is, we've had this program for pretty much the life of the SFP. We've seen lots and lots of projects come in, and we've over the years, through all of our experience with these projects, we've noticed a lot of areas that we think we can clarify regulations and improve them. They seem to work really well. It's just that we think that they may be able to be organized a little better. And so that's really what we're presenting to you today. We have a draft of the regs. I'll go over the order of the documents that were handed out or that were sent out on our website. What we're looking for today is your comments, your input. We're going to have another meeting on the 31st of this month. I believe it's in the morning of the 31st. It should be in the same room here in the state capitol. And so anything that we get today, we'll discuss at that time. And we're also going to have the other half of our regulations for the seismic mitigation program. Today, we're just presenting facility hardship. But for those of you that are familiar with the programs, they're pretty similar. One is a seismic component, one is just a general health and safety program, but the regulations are pretty similar and their requirements and so forth. So what you see today will be carried over to the seismic program. Some of the changes that we made, you'll notice immediately a lot of structural and organizational changes. There's a lot more enumeration. The reason we did that is because it's a lot of the same content. However, before it was kind of dispersed amongst the section, we've really kind of compartmentalized the different requirements and the different aspects of the program, facets of the program, and we've organized them in a way that we hope is helpful. Again, we're looking for your input on that as well. But we've arranged them in a way that we think is maybe a little bit more meaningful and a little bit easier to follow and to kind of, if you're looking at it for the first time, we're hoping it's a little easier to recognize all the requirements and so forth. There's some program changes we're recommending as well that we've proposed. I think most of them, I think everybody's going to really benefit from them and enjoy. We're going to go over those in just a minute, but all the changes we made were made in a kind of a logical and meaningful way. We think that we've kind of extended the program's intent. And so any changes we made were to that end. We're trying to not only reorganize the regulations in a more easier to follow way, but we're trying to kind of hone them into what the program is intended for. So as far as feedback, we want your general feedback, of course, but I wanted to pay close attention to three main areas. The first one, we're trying to develop a criteria for mold mitigation. We've seen an increase in those types of projects in the recent last few years. We're not mold experts. It seems that it's one of those things that there's a lot of opinions on, and so we're trying to really get a hold of how to fund mold projects. What are the requirements as far as the reports and the concurrence that goes along with them? We would really like input on that if you have that for us today. And again, for those of you that aren't in attendance and you're watching, please send that to us. You can email it, you can send us a letter, whatever is easiest for you. Call us up and we can talk about it, but we would really like the input on that. Also, we're intending to include portable classrooms or portable buildings as part of the facility hardship program. They haven't been very compatible with the program in the past. But we do want to find a way to include those and not kind of exclude them from the program. So we need costing information on that. We have some of our own. We haven't presented it today because it's very preliminary. However, if you have information on that or know where we can find it, we would really appreciate that as well. And then lastly, we're in the process of most likely developing a template for cost estimates. You'll notice in our regulations that we're going to require a specific format for them. And that's to make it easier for all of us, not only for our review, but for the district to produce and to know exactly what they should be, like in what format they should be creating their estimates and presenting them to us. So if you have ideas about that, we have a few models we could look at. We have our site development worksheet that many of you might be familiar with, and then we also have a cost estimate form for our career technical education program that we could borrow from. Let's see, and then lastly, the documents that we have today, I just want to go over those very quickly. First off, we have an outline. Again, there's a very increased amount of enumeration in the regulations. This outline, Silvana made it. It's fantastic. It really helps. I would highly encourage you to at least keep one for your pocket. It's a great outline, a good reference. We'll update it, of course, if the regs change. But that's one of the handouts. And then in the main handout, the first 2 pages are the cover, just our discussion item. It's really just a kind of a conversation starter. Jennifer and Silvana are going to go over the details of that more in depth here in a minute. Attachment B, sorry, I should mention too that the attachments are in the packet in the order that they're mentioned in the item. They're a little bit out of order. They actually go B, C, A. So attachment B is the authority for the program. Attachment C is our existing regulations, and that's about, that takes you to, let's see, page 6 in your packet. And then after that, you have a 9-page section that may or may not be labeled on top, attachment A. Those are our proposed regulations. I apologize if you got a version that wasn't labeled. So those are the documents we'll be working out of. We'll try not to go back and forth between them too much, but again, I think this outline is going to be your friend today. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Silvana, and thank you.
So hello, everyone. Again, my name is Silvana Krofchek, and I'm the project manager for the Facility Hardship Program and the Seismic Mitigation Program. And I'm going to start off with going a little bit deeper into the organization of our proposed regulations. So the first thing that we majorly focused on with this proposed document is combining the facility hardship replacement and rehabilitation sections into one section. In the current regulations, right now, replacement is in 1859.82, whereas rehabilitation is in 1859.83 as a separate section under excessive cost hardship grants. What we wanted to do is bring that rehabilitation section back up to the same section as the replacement section so that it reads more as a comprehensive program, and it's easier to find which program would more likely apply to your situation in the same section, and it's easier to reference. So that can be seen on pages 1 through 9 of 9. That's your attachment A packet of the facility hardship proposed regulations. The second main thing that we're doing with the proposed regulation organization is that we're separating the facility hardship regulations from the seismic mitigation regulations. So currently, we don't have the seismic mitigation proposed regulations here in this text today, but the seismic mitigation regulations will be present at the next stakeholder meeting, and they will mirror very similarly the structure of the current proposed document that we have for facility hardship. The reason that we wanted to separate those two out is that although they're very similar in their sister programs, there are slight differences and slight more specific requirements for the seismic mitigation program, and we felt that it would be a better clarification of what is required for each program specifically when districts are submitting an application, and so that was intended to clarify. And then the third thing that we've done with the organization, as Brian mentioned earlier, is we've increased enumeration. So as you look through the proposed text, there's a lot more letters and numbers that correspond to different sections of the different regulation text. And what that will allow us to do is when we're referencing certain pieces of this regulation as we're trying to assist stakeholders and districts in applying to our program. It helps us better target our advice and what we're referencing and what requirements we're actually needing for a complete application and to fulfill the criteria of this program. And then the last thing that we majorly focused on for organization is providing a clear outline of all the documents that are necessary for a complete application submittal. And so where those can really be seen in this current 9-page packet is page 2 of 9 and page 7 of 9. And those are under section little b, 1, A through B on page 2 of 9. And on page 7 of 9, it's included in section little d, numbers 1 through 4. And that will basically list out and organize the specific documents on top of the application for funding, which is your 5004 document, but all the other documents that are specific to the facility hardship program that are going to be required with the complete application. So that kind of sums up the main focus of our organization in this proposed document. And with that, I will hand it over to Jennifer.
All right, so I'm going to go over the main points where we've clarified what the program criteria is. So none of this is completely different from what it was before, but we thought it would be very helpful to make these clarifying points within the new regulation packet. So there are 7 main points, and as I go through them, I will reference where you can find that in your regulation packet, which page, and then also which section. So the first point would be we wanted to increase the clarification on what type of projects qualify for the facility hardship program. So the Education Code 17075.10 is what charges us to follow for this program, and it outlines that applications or the funding provided will be for unusual circumstances beyond control of the district. And so we want to clarify within our new regulations section, so page 1 of 9 and then section 1859.82A16, that specifically is the spirit of the program, and that's compared to applications that are more for modernization or routine maintenance. So wanting to just contrast the difference there. The next point is that the program is going to be focused on much more clearly on health and safety threats that are existing, and that's in comparison to reimbursements. So the purpose of the program really is to focus on mitigating a current health and safety threat to students and staff. And we want to ensure that our resources are really focused on those things. So what you'll see on page 1 of 9, and it's in kind of 2 different sections. So it's 1859.82 and then also 1859.82.1 is there's some criteria for when we will accept applications compared to when they get DSA plan approval or to when there's completion of the project. So what would be helpful is we would like input on projects that do not need DSA approval. What is a reasonable time to submit the application? So for example, it's a little bit easier for us to make that connection on, okay, you got DSA approval and you need to submit your application within a year or 18 months, for example. But what could be a good pinpoint for that for a project that doesn't need that type of approval? Could it be completion of the project? Could it be from a notice to proceed? What would be an appropriate, relatively universal time point that we could start that period? And so if you have any feedback on that, it would be fantastic. You can email us. I think our contact information is on the website. I'll just throw my email out there in case you don't have it handy. It's Jennifer, JENNIFER .Maestretti, MAESTRETTI @ .ca.gov. And if you have any other questions, you can go ahead and email me there too, and I'll share them with the team. All right, so moving on, point 3. So we wanted to have increased clarification on what's needed for projects that are for the mitigation of mold, lead, or asbestos. So we have received a number of these types of applications recently and found that there are unique struggles that the district has, as well as unique needs that we have to make sure that we have a complete application. And so, for example, a lot of projects for the facility hardship program only submit one industry specialist report. And what we've recognized with these types of projects is we may need more than one, meaning we may have one that has your laboratory testing results and how the testing was done and where that was done to demonstrate that you do have the presence of one of these threats. And then separately, there may be a different report, let's say from a civil engineer, an architect, a structural engineer, that identifies what the source of that water intrusion is that's causing the moisture, that's causing the mold, for example. So is it because there's poor drainage on the site? Is it because the slab foundation wasn't sealed properly? Is it because of a leaking roof? That kind of thing is not always identified by whoever is doing the laboratory testing. And so those types of projects overall may have some unique considerations. And we wanted to be able to expand and clarify what is needed to be able to provide funding for those types of projects. All right, so point number, that is going to be found on page 2 of 9 in section 1859.82.1B2A. And then moving on to point 4, we wanted to clarify that only projects where funding is being requested for a school building needs to submit a cost-benefit analysis. So we have in the past had a lot of confusion on whether a cost-benefit analysis needed to be submitted for replacement projects, rehabilitation projects, projects for something that doesn't have to do with a building. And we want to clarify that unless you're asking for funding for a building, you really don't need to do that cost-benefit analysis. So it's not going to be included in the list of documentation that you'll need for those types of applications. And the reason for that is this calculation, the cost-benefit analysis, is to compare the cost of what the district provides for rehabilitating the building to a specific formula that's based off of replacement of interior square footage of a facility. And as you can imagine, that formula doesn't really make sense when you try to apply it to an HVAC system or a sewer system or something of that nature. It's apples to oranges. And so we recognize that when you have issues such as that are outside of your building, maybe it's part of your site itself, that you may need to replace components, and that will be part of your minimum work. That's fine. It's just you don't need to do that specific calculation as part of your application. Okay, and that can be found on page 8 of 9. Okay, and point 5, so we want to make it very, very clear in what circumstances your modernization program eligibility or your new construction program eligibility could be affected if you receive funding for a facility hardship application. So the criteria in which those eligibilities will be offset is already within the regulations, but just for clarification and transparency, we wanted to put it within this section so it's very clear. As you may or may not know, you don't have to use eligibility for the modernization or new construction program to receive funding through the facility hardship program or for the seismic mitigation program, but there are circumstances in which this program can affect that eligibility if you receive funding. So one example would be if the facility hardship program pays to replace a building on your site, then the modernization, the date that the building was constructed for the purpose of calculating your modernization eligibility will be reset to when you receive an apportionment for the funding for the replacement of that building through the program. Additionally, if through the facility hardship program, we are paying to replace facilities and there's a net increase in your capacity, that net increase is going to offset the new construction eligibility that you have, which is the same for if you had a modernization project or a new construction project that had an increase in capacity as well. So it's uniform to the other programs we have. So you can find that on page 9 of 10 in section F. Okay, so part 6, we want to, and Brian kind of touched on this a little bit, provide some detailed and clarified criteria on what's required for a cost estimate to be submitted for our office. So that would include a cost estimate that outlines the minimum work required to mitigate whatever the health and safety threat is that needs addressing. And then it will look very, very similar. Well, let me take a step back. We're hoping to create a template almost that districts will be able to use and fill out and submit for their applications. We have been asked for one multiple times in the past, and we're hoping that through the creation of one, it'll assist districts in putting together all the information that they need within it, without us needing to go back and say, hey, before we can review your application, we need you to add this or change this. Having all that criteria there will hopefully make it more efficient for districts to put those estimates together, and then it will definitely make it more efficient for us to review and approve those costs during the application review process at OPSC. So if you're wondering what that will look like, it will probably look very similar to the cost estimate template for the Career Technical Education program or the site development worksheet, which is used mainly for the new construction program. It'll probably be some sort of a hybrid of those and include components from both. We are open to receiving a little bit of feedback though on what would be most helpful for the districts to include in that also when putting this together. So one example is a criteria for the program that's already existing is that all of the estimate amounts, the dollar amounts that are put into the estimate need to be in accordance to the Sierra West current construction cost publication for rehabilitation and repair. So there will be a section on the template that we're going to propose where you can put the reference number or the CSI number that is listed in that book, and that will make it very quick for us to be able to reference and then approve those costs. So if there are any other tips, tricks, or anything like that that you would recommend that you think would also help districts and this program to most efficiently process these cost estimates for their applications, we would love your feedback. So you will be able to find the clarifying language for that on page 2 of 9. That's in section B2C 1 through 5. And then the last clarifying point for program criteria is that previously at the very end of, well, not previously, currently at the very end of our regulations section, there is a very small section that speaks to the fact that districts can receive approval of their eligibility in advance of program funding. And so what that is basically our conceptual approvals that we processed in the past. Well, what we've done is we've really expanded that section to speak more to design applications. So what was not previously existing or currently existing in the regulations is, can you receive design funding? How is that going to be calculated? What do I need to submit for that? And so we've created a large section within these regulations to be able to outline those things, because a number of districts that we work with, they come to us for funding because they don't have all the funding in their pocket right there to be able to just mitigate whatever their issue is, and they may need financial assistance up front to really get the process started. And for that reason, we wanted to make it much more clear and transparent what that process would look like and what the requirements for that process is. So you can find that on page 9 of that new regulation packet in section G 1 through 3. So with that, if anybody has any questions, we will love to answer them at the end. I'm going to put it back to Silvana so she can go over some of the funding changes, and then we'll have a couple things we'll touch on after that, and then it'll be open for questions and comments.
All right, so I'm going to go over some of the funding changes that we've included in this update of regulations. The first one that we've gone over is that cost estimates for mitigation can be based on a higher F3 cost level as opposed to the current F2 cost level. And so for those of you who aren't familiar with the Sierra West current construction and remodeling costs estimating guide that we use for facility hardship and for seismic mitigation, the way that the costs are laid out is in columns of F factors. Also, they basically go through F1, F2, F3, F4. Each of those F factors correspond to an increasing degree of difficulty in construction that results in a loss of productivity. So currently, the facility hardship program automatically approves things at an F2 level, which is indicating a loss of productivity that results in basically a 2/3 productivity rate compared to a normal blank slate. In the body of documents that we've reviewed lately, a lot of the documents and applications that we've received, it's become very clear that these projects do cost more. That whether it's due to a constricted timeline due to mitigate the health and safety threat, or a remote location, there's different considerations with facility hardship type projects that elevate the costs. And an F3 level cost in Sierra West corresponds to a loss of productivity of 1/2. So we felt that instead of looking at each project and deciding whether it represents a productivity loss of about 1/2 and trying to justify that case by case, we felt that it would be a more consistent application of the program in a more equitable review to allow districts to request their cost estimate at the F3 level for facility hardship and seismic mitigation projects. So that description is within the cost estimate details that can be found on both pages 2 of 9 and pages 7 of 9, and that corresponds to section little b 2C2, and then for rehabilitation it corresponds to section D3 capital B. So another funding change update that we've made is in these proposed regulations is the ability of projects to receive rehabilitation funding for projects that are coming in for rehabilitation to request the geographic percentage factor grant. Currently, under our current regulations, the rehabilitation projects are not eligible to request the geographic factor grant. That's a grant that is associated with being in a remote or rural location that generally increases the cost of doing these projects because it costs more to get supplies out there, it costs more to get construction crews, and bids may be limited. So we recognize that there's a higher cost with that. So we felt that it would be a more universal extension of that grant to the entire facility hardship program so that it would apply to both our replacement projects and our rehabilitation, and it's more clear that it encompasses our entire program. And that can be found on page 8 of 9 under section little d 5B2 under our rehabilitation regulations. The next funding change that we've made is we've allowed districts to use replacement funding for rehabilitation work without requiring an appeal to the board. So currently, for facility hardship projects and seismic mitigation projects that do not involve a historic building, if the district qualifies for replacement funding under the cost-benefit analysis, they would have to appeal to the board in order to perform rehabilitation work on that building. And previously, we received a lot of applications that have had historic buildings, for example, that wanted to preserve the historic value of that building. It was a local decision at the district level to preserve that historic value by rehabilitating the building. And we had a lot of appeals directed at that. And so the board made a decision that we would allow replacement funding to be used for rehabilitation work in historic situations. Under the new funding regulations for facility hardship, we're proposing to allow that across the board. We believe that it should be a district's decision to rehabilitate their building if they wish. It would require, under these proposed regulations, that the modernization would be offset if you do receive replacement funding for that particular building. But we felt that it was more of a district's decision to decide on what to do that, and it would not require an appeal under these proposed regulations. That can be found under section little b for capital D, and that is on page 6 of 9 of attachment A. And then the next funding change that we're proposing is a differentiation between standard classrooms and specialized classrooms when we're considering school capacity and funding. And so that can best be seen on page 4 of 9 of your attachment A documents, and 5 of 9 when we start looking at the square footage replacement chart. And essentially what we're doing is we're looking at classrooms that are specifically designed for a specific type of instruction, such as laboratories and workshops, auto shops, things that have specific equipment that's designed for a specific type of instruction. And we don't want to limit the eligible classroom space based on those classrooms. So that would be considered a different category under these funding regulations. And that can be seen again on page 4 of 9 under section little b for capital B to C. And along with that, our next funding change is replacement funding for classrooms based on square footage guidelines in the Title V regulations. What that means is we took a look at the California Department of Education recommendations under Title V for different types of space, and we wanted to make sure that we were providing the educationally adequate space at a minimum for those types of spaces. So if you look at page 5 of 9 on your attachment A, starting with the row that says severe classrooms down, those rows are new additions to the current regulation square footage chart that basically outlines, based on educational code, what the minimum necessary square footage as listed in Title V would be recommended for those types of spaces. And those are additional types of spaces that we want to consider with this update to regulations. And then our next update would be an addition of minimum square footage amount for replacement for library area. And so that would also be found on page 5 of 9. Specifically, we're looking at the row for the library and media center. Under our current regulations, there is no minimum square footage listed for the library space. And under Title V, we wanted, according to those recommendations, we wanted to make sure that we were providing a educationally adequate space for the library and media center. We wanted to make sure that we were at the very least making sure that that space was fulfilling the needs of the district. And then our next update can be found on page 3 and 4 of 9. And this is about adding flexibility in the reporting year for enrollment used to calculate when we're calculating the replacement grant. So what we currently do for replacement grants is we justify the amount of eligible classroom square footage based on current enrollment. But we also recognize that there are times where the current year of enrollment isn't the best number to use. It's not most reflective of what's going on with that particular school site. So we wanted to allow flexibility to not only, in certain situations, we use the current year, but for schools, for example, that are shut down as a result of this facility hardship, we want to make sure that we can also use the CBED's enrollment of the last reporting year at which the school site was open to better reflect what we could expect of this facility had this facility hardship and health and safety threat not occurred. Another option would be that we can use the average of the CBED's enrollment of the current year and the 2 previous enrollment years. And the intent behind that is to kind of even out any fluctuations that may have occurred at a site that maybe isn't closed down, but there might be an enrollment drop at the current year due to the health and safety threat that is occurring on the campus. So we wanted to offer some flexibility in how we look at the enrollment that that particular site could realize after the mitigation of this problem. And then the last major funding change that I want to go over is on page 6 of 9, and that would be under section little b 4C. And that, again, as both Brian and Jennifer had alluded to, is the clarification that we want to make it clear that we want to provide funding for portable classrooms for sites that would like to replace their square footage with a portable type classroom. And what we're really open to is recommendations on where we can look for an appropriate calculation and an appropriate value that we can assign to a separate cost-benefit analysis for looking at portable classrooms. Under our current regulations, the way that we calculate square footage replacement, it doesn't really translate to portable type classroom space. It's not really a valid calculation for that type of space. So we want to accommodate that and capture that information as well and provide that portable service. But we will need to have a separate cost-benefit analysis for that particular type of space, should that be required. And with that, I will hand it back to Brian.
Thank you. Great job, thanks. Okay, well, that concludes our presentation of the items. We're open to answering questions, and we'd love to have feedback, so please take advantage. If you could just come up to the table when you'd like to speak, state your name, and have at it. Please come up.
Good morning. Rebecca Curley with Coalition for Adequate School Housing. I wanted to thank you all for putting a tremendous amount of effort and time into looking at the facility hardship program and examining ways that we can make it a better program that serves the needs of our schools. It's obvious that you've put a lot of thought into this, and we really appreciate the work that you've done. We still need to go through with a fine-toothed comb and have a better understanding of the changes. So these are just some initial thoughts in looking at the proposal that you've put forward today. And I also appreciate that you're asking questions about how can we refine some of this and kind of find the best mechanism or the best way to do this. The first thing that stood out to me is limiting to kind of the immediate health and safety needs, and then not authorizing the reimbursements. I think that there are a lot of situations that we have, especially if we're looking at seismic projects, where time is of the essence, especially if it's a facility that you need because you lack the capacity to house those students otherwise. Obviously, there's interim housing and other things that you can do, but there are certainly circumstances where we'd need to move forward with doing the work and do so sort of at the expense to your operating budget or another facilities project, and having that option to still come and be a partner on a project like this for, it is an immediate health and safety need, therefore you need to address it in a really timely manner. So that's one thing that stands out to us. Another is there's language in there about limiting the option to appeal if you don't meet the requirements that are stated previously. And so I guess this is more a question. Was hoping to get a better sense from you all of the intent behind that and why we're seeing that in the facility hardship regulations proposal.
Well, first of all, before I answer that part, the seismic part, I don't think the reimbursement clause that we put in these regulations.
It's not carrying forward into the seismic section.
Right, because the seismic statute, I think, allows for reimbursement. But the other question about the appeal, correct me if I'm wrong. I think that's correct. The other portion about the appeals, we just wanted to. It's certainly not closed off to appeal. It's just that certain aspects of the program will be, but we're trying to make a clear criteria so that we really don't need to go there. Yeah. So that it's a lot of the appeals we've seen, I think, are because we don't have the clarification we needed in the regulation. So We've added that. We're certainly open to reconsidering that, but that's kind of the reason behind that.
Okay, that's helpful. And certainly shoring up kind of, you can use the replacement money for rehabilitation, that certainly helps with some of that. But I think having the opportunity to come forward and kind of plead your case with the board is just something that we really value. So
Okay.
I appreciate that.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Olga Shiloh with Los Angeles Unified School District. And I want to echo the comments of Rebecca to thank you for putting the effort forward and updating these regulations. I know that I've just started with LA Unified and I've been learning a lot about OPSC, but while we're still reviewing and analyzing the proposed changes to the regulations, there are certain things that have come up of concern from the brief overview, and we are preparing a formal and written response that
Thank
we'll
you.
submit with a lot of detailed feedback. But as Rebecca mentioned, we are concerned with the limitation on appeals. And then we also thought that the reimbursement proposed changes would apply to the hardship facility hardship, and in our experience, the program has become a reimbursement program versus, you get immediate funding, and these are imminent threats, and we have to address them. The other concern is the use of cost estimate, requirement to use cost estimate versus the actual cost, as we believe that when available, actual costs are more accurate. And then we also are, as you stated in the beginning, that OPSC is not an expert on mold evaluations and remediation. So we are, wondering about that, and why is it only mold? Why is it limited just to that? For example, is this going to be applied to asbestos and other factors? So, but we are going to prepare a more written,
Okay.
detailed response.
We can
and
clarify
questions.
as well. Thank you.
That's all. Thank you.
So Olga, thank you so much for your comment about the mold. I just wanted to respond to it quickly. So we're not trying to necessarily single out any one topic by saying that projects for mold would need more detailed criteria or specific criteria, but to use an example of a difficult situation that a district might have is, let's say they have mold in their facility and they want to mitigate it as quickly as they can, of course. What can happen though with any project, but especially projects like that, is if the district goes in and does the remediation immediately without doing very clear lab testing, for example, then we may not be able to fund the project. And so we want to prevent something like that happening to the district, where that's part of our intention on saying that we would want to do a site visit before everything gets ripped out, just so that we can confirm that you do have the reports that you need to have a complete application with us, and that we're working with you to make sure that you're not going to jump into that remediation, tear everything out, have no way of going back and demonstrating that you are eligible. So that's our intention. If there's another way you think that intention can be met and phrased differently, we would love to hear your feedback. Thanks.
Good afternoon, Alana Cunningham, Jack Schrader and Associates. I have a question regarding conceptual approval. I know that has gone away, and I'm wondering if it would be a possibility to revisit that concept of providing conceptual approvals. I understand that you do kind of informal, giving districts an assurance that everything appears to qualify. But in some cases, it would be helpful to have a conceptual approval so that districts can determine how much of their modernization eligibility they'd have to use for the facility hardship project that may not qualify for facility hardship. So if there's any way that you could revisit that, I think that would be helpful.
Okay.
For districts with their planning.
Sure, we can take another look at it.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Hello, I'm Jamie Green, Trinity Alps Unified School District Superintendent. First of all, I'd really like to thank the efforts of OPSC and what you guys are doing here today. Being a small school superintendent, immediately I felt like you guys were part of our family. We, for people in the audience, we had our elementary school and high schools completely closed, gyms, cafeterias, in July. July 1st, we found out that we had high levels of toxic mold, and those are indoor testings. They were confirmed by the county health doctor that our facilities were no longer safe for students or for adults. So our number one priority is health and safety in our district. It is also with OPSC, health and safety. We felt that immediately. We felt the care. They immediately came to our site. We know how busy you guys are. The fact that you guys are here, and I've seen you all in our place, I want to thank you for that. This is very difficult for everybody, though. It's very traumatic. We had students eating out in the snow. We eventually were able to get our schools abated. So something that's important would be reimbursement and portables, because I'm in the middle of this as a superintendent. So we have a $10 million budget. We were really excited about a $1.7 million reserve, which is well above the state average. We made very large cuts in our district last year to make us fiscally solvent. And when this has happened, it's really difficult. And the formula that's in place and what you guys have done is amazing. But we used all $1.7 million to put in portables, to hire engineers, to hire architects, to put in sidewalks. We put in 28 portables. And thankfully, with your guys, this is how you've helped us. We've ran school. We only missed 10 days of school all year. We've ran school, we've been playing basketball, we've been playing football. Our teams have been traveling to other sites to play basketball. So in this process, it warms my heart to see that you guys are looking at it and you're caring about it. So my talk is specifically mold. I understand other people in the audience. I have talked to doctors. I'm not an expert on mold, but I think it's logical to say with the data that high levels of airborne toxic mold, not just mold, toxic mold, needs to be addressed throughout the state. And I think as a superintendent, it's about instruction, it's about education, it's about talking. I don't think any of us in the room know enough about mold yet. I think it needs to be researched, and I think we need to use the data to drive it to keep all the students in the state of California safe. So reimbursement is important, because if we do nothing, then we're going to be out of that gym for another 6 months. If it's approvable expenses, if somebody just goes out on their own and does things and it doesn't get approved, I understand that. If it's within the scope of what would be improved, reimbursement, portables would be very important for any schools, if it be fire, flooding, mold, any of those, because small school budgets really can't afford to sign those contracts with all those portables, which would leave all of their students on an independent study program. They wouldn't be with their peers, they wouldn't be doing student government, and to be forced into that wouldn't be good. So I appreciate that you guys have looked into that. Also appreciate how hard you guys work with county offices as well. Our Jeff Morris at Trinity County, who's watching right now, is really worked with you guys well, and that's been a big benefit. I want to offer something today, because you guys have offered to us. Anything we've learned, we would like to work with you.
Thank you.
This process is tough. It's hard. Kids are frustrated. Adults are frustrated. But we need to use data. We need to not be emotional. We need to use logic, and we all need to put our hearts together for students. And so, more than anything, I wanted to drive 4 hours to Sacramento and thank you guys. I appreciate this. Today was heartwarming when I opened the email and said, wow, they're really listening. And so I commend you guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Means a lot. Thanks. We'll be working with you for sure.
So one follow-up comment that I have just in listening so far is I understand that there's concern that districts want to be able to mitigate their health and safety threats immediately and may not receive reimbursement funds for that. So I just want to make it clear that it's not that the funding could not be used to reimburse costs that you've already had, but we're wanting to look at some sort of a time frame in which we receive applications close to when the health and safety threat is identified, such that the funding that we provide is to help assist in the mitigation of that. And to use an extreme example, what we would want to move away from is an application for the mitigation of a structural deficiency that happened in 2006, and the use of time to process that type of application when the health and safety threat really is not existing anymore. Everyone's been able to move on and be safe, as opposed to being able to focus on funding applications where the students are in interim housing, or they're on independent study, or they are in facilities that are not currently safe. So that's the intention. So if there is a different time frame that you think would be appropriate, we'd be open to hearing that, because we do want you to be able to complete your projects as quickly as possible to mitigate that health and safety threat. We don't want to prevent you from doing that, or expand the amount of time that students are exposed to a health and safety threat because you're concerned about receiving funding. That's not the intention. So if you have any feedback on that, on how those things can be accomplished, that would be fantastic.
So I think I can help answer that. Jamie Dane, Trinity Alps. So I want to give concrete examples of what happened. Like I said, we live up in the north and it's cold. And so we were able to, if you're talking reimbursement, we were able to mitigate the mold, come in with professional testers and abaters, and come through and do that. And so we're not completely open, but what we were able to do was to mitigate the mold in our cafeteria at the high school. And so when they were done with it, the ceiling tiles were off and we had a concrete floor, and the students were being served food outside. So we looked at that as soon as we put the ceiling tiles in ourselves and left the concrete floor, we were able to put the kids back in, which was wonderful. So that would kind of leave that open to those gray areas. We can get students inside the building, and then we could come to OPSC for the funding and look at putting in the flooring. You know, you don't want to leave a concrete floor in there. But if with health and safety, our concern was we had staff and students outside in the cold, and we didn't have anywhere where we could feed, 300 students. We had portables that hold 30 at a time. So that's just that's where I was going. I always like giving concrete examples. That allowed us to do that. So if you were to come to our school today at 7 o'clock in the morning, you would see that students are in the cafeteria. But it's not completed, so I don't think OPSC would come in and DSA would come in and say, wow, that looks awesome. But for us, it looks really nice.
Do you remember, have you gotten your DSA approval yet?
We're working on it. We have an
Working on
architect.
Okay.
We have old plans. The thing with this that's interesting, so I'm just going to tell everybody in the room, we had an elementary school that was modernized. Its level of mold was much less because it was modernized, the roofing and everything else about 12 years ago. We have a high school that's 50 years old, which is definitely not modernized. So they're different. So at the elementary school, we're not going to need DSA. We're going to be able to just put in tile flooring and move forward. At the high school, it's different. We need DSA. So that gives us two
Okay.
scopes for the facility hardship. So on Monday, our architects are coming in, and then we're going to meet with DSA because the projects at the high school require that. So it'll take longer. At the
Okay.
elementary school, the turnaround could be as quick as painting walls, putting in ceiling tiles, and putting in flooring.
Okay. Yeah, I'm wondering if we could weave the DSA timeline in somehow.
Yeah, and they've been helpful as well.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Anybody else with questions or comments? There's got to be some out there.
So is there another place where they can find our the best contact information to send in the questions and comments that they have?
Yeah, I think your guys' contact, their contact information is on the seismic and facility hardship area of the website. You can look me up in the Directory of Services, Brian Lepask. We'd be happy to receive anything. You can also just send it to our, just mail it to us, or send it to our general. You could call our general phone line and ask for somebody. I think that's about where, yeah. And once again, we have a meeting coming up again on the 31st. We're going to address all the comments that we received today and anything we get in between now and then. Does anybody know of any kind of studies we could refer to or information out there that we might be able to seek out for any of these topics? If so, we'd be really interested in hearing about that. We have been trying to track those down, but so far what we found is fair. I'd say it's decent, but it's kind of minimal. And so we would like to know if there's any suggestions out there, places we could look for information. So you could, if you don't know that right now, you could send that to us. We'd appreciate it very much too.
All right, so before we close, just to kind of build on what you were saying, Brian, the topics for the next meeting, we're going to also bring back the seismic mitigation program proposed regulations. They will look very similar to what you're seeing for facility hardship, but of course with the specific criteria that comes with the seismic mitigation program. We are going to potentially update our regulation packet based off of the feedback today. And the clarifying information for mold. And then one thing that we want help on, and Silvana kind of touched on this, is the appropriate funding amount for portable replacement. So if you have a portable building that needs some sort of remediation or repair or replacement due to this existing health and safety threat, then what does that look like? Because our funding formula right now is based off of permanent construction, which is not apples to apples for what the cost is for the construction of a portable building or purchase and installation of a portable building. So what would an appropriate amount be that can be used for a statewide program for us to provide? And also for us to calculate what the cost benefit analysis will be for that, because we do intend to have a cost benefit analysis for portable facilities to help determine whether we should pay for the repair or rehabilitation of that portable or help assist in the funding of the replacement of that portable building. So whatever that dollar amount is that is determined to be appropriate, that would be used for both the cost benefit analysis and for the funding replacement. So if there is a tool or a resource that you have that you believe would be good for determining that, if you would share that, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, we do have some information on that from some projects that we worked with in the last few years. And I think that's a good starting point for us. And of course, we're going to publish our item in advance of the next meeting. You'll be able to review that and see what's in there ahead of time. But if you do send stuff to us before that, we could incorporate any feedback that you might want to add. So, okay, last chance. I don't want to close it off and then have somebody regret not saying something. Okay, well, if there's nothing else, I think that's all we have. Thank you very much for attending and watching. We'll see you again on the 31st. Thank you.